Today I've got some shorthands, quick, simple, big curves and lines that you're often going to find in a pose that can just help you figure things out a bit more quickly and easily, plus additional quick tips to help you with your gesture drawing. So sticking with this pose, another thing that I like to have in my toolbox is a few shorthands, things that I know are going to probably be there, to save me on thinking a little bit so that I don't have to reinvent everything from scratch. So in this pose, I have a leg that is straight and I'm looking at it from the side. So this is when I know I'm going to find this S-shaped curve. So it's useful, like right along the front, almost every leg that I'm looking at from the side, I'm going to find that S-shaped curve. Now, here's another example, by the way. So that reference was from the wonderful Graphic Studio. This is one of our own ones. So this reference, you see it's a leg, it's pretty much straight, and I get this big S-shaped curve. And so in my quick, simple sketch, I know that I'm going to be able to summarize this with a quick S-shaped curve. Now I have some of these ideas in my head. Oh, this often happens. I often see this, but I'm always going to base it on what I see. I'm not going to use that S-shaped curve if it isn't there, if I don't see it. But it's just something that I can look for. I go, oh yeah, it's there again, and I'll use it. So how about the feet? Now, obviously in the feet, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? There's a lot of nuances, there's a lot of structure there. And in this simplified drawing, I'm not going to capture all of that, right? What do I want to capture? If there's a million things that I can see about these feet, what are the top 2 or 3 things? One of them is just, where does the foot meet the ground? So if I can show where the foot meets the ground, this gives the viewer information about where the ground is and also where the foot is. And that is some of the most important stuff about the foot. So if I come over to this other foot over here, I would just go, where does it meet the ground? And I might give it something like that. Maybe I would also indicate the heel so that they can see this end of the foot and the other end of the foot, and they can fill in the blank about the rest of the foot. So this leg might get summarized with an S-shaped curve and then a couple of lines, for the foot. And it might be that simple. And then in the context of the broader picture, it will hopefully make sense. The other thing though that I really want to be sure about, or I really want to pay attention to, much more importantly than the toes and all of this kind of stuff, is what is the angle between these feet? So I could just check, I don't know, it could be any angle, like between this side of this foot to the heel, or as long as I try to get this diagonal that's happening. Or it could just be that I observe, if I take this line across, this foot is coming down lower than that, because that is showing me that this foot is closer to me, and it's kind of giving me and explaining the ground plane the person is standing on. All right, how about a foot that is viewed from the front? So for a foot viewed from the front, what is the most important thing that I want to get across? So again, where is that foot meeting the ground from my point of view? I often find that for a foot viewed from the front, I'll explain it just by putting a line over the top like that. All right, so I've usually explained some, stuff about the lower leg. Normally in the lower leg, what I really emphasize is this outward curve of the shin. So you can see that even in this shadow. Look at the shape of that shadow. You see that? The lower leg, the shin, kind of makes these outward curving, like C-shaped curves. If I can continue it on down to the big toe, I will. But then I'll try and show where the foot meets the ground. Again, I want to get that relationship between the 2 feet, which explains the ground. And then for a foot flat on the ground coming towards me, I'll wrap a line over the top of it to help explain it. Anytime something is coming towards me in one of these quicker, simpler sketches, if I can wrap a line over it, it really quickly and simply explains what's going on. Kind of like, if I have a cylindrical shape, it's clear that it's coming towards me because of the lines that I have over it. And if I can cheat in more of those lines, it just helps explain this is a thing, a 3D shape that is coming towards me. And that's really important, right? And I'm just trying to explain really important stuff. Now, I said about my shorthands for a leg that you're looking at from the side. What about one that I'm looking at from the front? Quite often, I'm going to simplify that down into like 2 lines that get closer together. What's the most simplest basic thing about a leg is like, where is it starting and where is it going to? And then what happens along the way, broadly speaking, in this case, is it starts off wider at the top of the thigh and it gets narrower towards the ankle. So if I'm really simplifying this down, this edge definitely can become just a straight line. And I'll often just simplify this edge as a straight line. I'm losing more information, like I'm losing the fact that this comes out here. But in terms of the overall leg, I'm really telling the story of what it's doing mostly with these 2 lines, and so that's what I'm going to use. If you want to put in more information, you might go, I want to include this and this. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's nice because you've got a simpler side here and then a bit more complicated side here. And you've got a curve against a straight line. And that asymmetry is quite nice for your gestural drawings. On the other hand, that is like a shorthand that I like to use, like 2 lines that just get closer together, or something like this. On this leg though, I got to base things on what I'm really seeing, right? And so if my shorthands, and I'm like, that leg looks pretty straight, but 2 straight lines doesn't feel like it captures what that leg is really genuinely doing. So I might not go into my bag of, pre-prepared shorthands that I always use. And I go, wait, that's not going to work. If I really look at this, I feel like this is a S-shaped curve. That summarizes this leg, right? That summarizes this leg really quite nicely. So that's what I'm going to use here. And I'm like, but I usually use that for a leg from the side. Usually for a leg from the front, I'm using a straight line and another straight line. But in this case, because of what this leg is actually doing, I need to use my observations and not some formula and do what genuinely summarizes that leg in the simplest terms possible. So another quick tip for you, something that you can look out for, something that's hopefully super useful, is men tend to have love handles, like a form above the pelvis like this that kind of bulges out. And often this is less prominent on female figures. So this is a generalization. It's not always like this, but often I'm going to find that this form can be separated from this one on men, and it's worth separating them. And on a female figure, quite often, I don't need to sort of separate this bulge from this one. It's going to be that I can kind of bring it down, all the way from the waist. I can bring it down to one curve sometimes. Even on this side, I would probably summarize this as a straight line down to the pelvis without much of a bulge of love handles above the pelvis. And then I'm going to have this form here and then this straight over here. So it's slightly more prominent, this love handle form, on the male figures and not so much on the female figures. So another quick tip for you is to sprinkle on straight lines into your gestural drawing. I find they help so much. I do see advice out there which is like, gesture drawing is all about big, flowy curves, and they can definitely be a really big part of your drawings. But then it's nice to set them off against straight lines as well. Sometimes I'll see people's drawings and they're kind of like big, flowy lines, like everything is turned into this. And what happens here is that the drawing doesn't really become very clear or about anything specifically. Whereas if I go, all right, I have this straight line and then I've got this kind of flowing stuff on the other side, the straight line helps that flowy stuff to stand out and be more flowy and energetic. It's contrast that helps us to see things. So if everything is big and flowy, then it's like reducing the big flowiness where you really want it to be there. All right, so what I'm specifically sort of referring to here is on this side, I definitely used straight lines to explain things along here, and that kind of sets off against a nice gentle curving side over here. Or in this thigh, this is a big straight line, sets off this big S-shaped curve. So another example in this sketch is this side is a big, simple straight line, and that's set off against a slightly more complicated, curvy and angle changey side on the other side. And it's that difference, that asymmetry between the two, that creates a bit of energy and visual interest. So I do this all the time, and these are like little habits that you can build. And so I definitely think sprinkling straight lines into your gestures will help you a ton. So another quick tip here is to emphasize overlaps. So here, I wanted to show that this chest part is in front of these back muscles going up into the armpit. And so I try to make this, and these often people call these like T overlaps because it kind of makes a T shape with one line disappearing behind the other. And anytime there's an overlap, I'm trying to emphasize that juncture, what? The point where one line disappears behind another, trying to like emphasize that a little bit so you get clarity about what is in front of what. And one time that I'll pull out an eraser is if I've kind of messed that up. So like if I did this line and I accidentally kind of swooped it up a bit too much like that, and it was quite heavy, say, like this, I might get the eraser and pull that back to try and clarify that overlap and show this is actually behind this. So another quick example in here is, this part of the neck is kind of in front of this part, which is the trapezius, which is disappearing behind that, and I try and show that overlap. So in here, we do have an example actually of where a T overlap isn't really being made clear because I've got this leg and then this edge of the torso is disappearing behind it. But I've actually kept that line going. So when you're drawing, it's often useful to continue a line, right? So even if it disappears behind something, continue it just so you understand what's going on. And in this case, I could do that really, really lightly, continue it. And then I could make the overlap a bit clearer by having a stronger line on top. And if I want to, I could then pull this back a bit with a rubber so that that overlap is clearer. In this case, I left it partly because this line that I've got back here is really quite faint. And so it's still pretty obvious that this leg is coming in front of it. But if I wanted to make this read a bit more easily and be a bit clearer, I could get rid of that. And then that shows, okay, there's that T overlap shape. And that's what's happening in the overlaps. And that's probably better. That's probably ideal. So another quick tip here is to redo your head angle, right? So this might just be specific to me. This is like a specific tip for me that I must remember, but maybe you're doing this too. So what I often find is that in my initial sketch, because we're always straightening out poses, we're all doing that. And it's really severe, like how much people will straighten out poses, right? I'm always going to accidentally straighten out the head angle, especially. I don't know why, but in the torso, I'm often looking for like the squash and the stretch now. So I'll often emphasize that, but I don't have that sort of habit enough for the head. And so I start straightening it out, making it in line with the torso. But in this case, this person was leaning their head forward. And so it's always worth having another look. Do I need to angle that head a bit more strongly? In this one, I would very often accidentally draw the head like this, like not throw it back enough. And having it thrown back, it really adds a lot to that pose. So just have a quick check, even if you're getting that nice squash and stretch and you're changing the angle of the rib cage versus the hips, you know, you've watched some of our videos, then you might be capturing that in the torso and then going, why is it still feeling kind of stiff? And it might just be that the head needs to be angled off to one side or the other. Okay, quick tip here for these simple sketches where you're trying to just capture the gesture. When it comes to the hands, put them like kind of like in a sock, like put a shape around the hand. The hand has lots of individual little forms going in all different directions. It's really complicated. And often, you know, we've got a whole pose here, right? And so we don't really want to go too deep into the hands. So this is probably the furthest that I would go with a hand in one of these if I can. So this is like a hand broken down. I've got a straight line. Notice the straight line and another straight line. I've tried to get the overall shape of the palm box, and then I started to separate even some of the fingers. But and actually on this side, I think maybe something about this pose made me want to get into the hands a bit more. It seems like the pose is all about what the hands are doing. But it's like this. I've even brought out that thumb form. This is way beyond what I would normally just go something like this, like a shape around the hand to summarize it. So an example of that is up here in this hand. You'll see none of that stuff is brought out. I just did this simple shape that kind of summarizes the hand. It's almost like there's a sock on the hand. It's particularly, I mean, this looks more like a flower. I mean, I don't know what that is. But anyway, hopefully it's not so bad. In this one, I decided to do the shape of the palm. All the fingers were so splayed out. And then I just thought, okay, let's do the outer edge of the finger on each side. And then they can fill in the rest. But I really don't want to get into. And by the way, I said before, like a foot that's coming towards us. I'll show where it's meeting the ground and wrap a line over the top. And so there that is in practice. I hope some of those quick tips and shorthands have been useful, but really specific things that you can think about when you're doing your gesture drawing. If you want a big picture overview of what it takes to get good at gesture drawing, you know, in terms of practice, instead of in terms of big principles, I have another video up here on the screen, 11 ingredients to gesture drawing. Check it out and I'll see you over there.